Hi, welcome back to The Perspective on BeritaSatu. We're discussing Masala Bumbu with Senior Editor of the Jakarta Post, Endy Bayuni, and the Ambassador to Indonesia from India, Gurjit Singh. We started to move towards media between the two countries, so naturally, we'll start with you, Endy.
Yeah.
What are the similarities and differences today?
I would say the similarities in the media is that we are both to blame. On both sides, both medias are to blame for the ignorance among the Indians about Indonesia and among Indonesians about India. Of course, there's Bollywood, but Bollywood's not really a representation of India. I think the popular TV program Mahabharata, again, is an ancient India, but I think most Indonesians are not really aware about the modern India in the same way that most Indians are not aware about the modern Indonesia. I think the media should take part in the blame for that state of affairs, and also media can actually make it make amends. And I think this is happening because now there are growing awareness on both sides about the media to start reporting about what is happening in India and also about what is happening in Indonesia. I think one thing that unites the two media is that both are now free. India, the press in India has been free all the time, but Indonesia since 1998 we have press freedom. And democracy is very much part of the values that have evolved in Indonesia, and including and the media is also playing a role.
But it hasn't been matched by a transfer of culture between the countries.
Well, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. I think once the media start reporting on one another by ourselves, not depending on the Western mediation, I think there is going to be greater understanding and realization that we are actually much closer. It should be easy for us because the basics, the principles are already there. It's just we just need someone. I think the media, the leaders, to actually bring the awareness that we are close and that strategically we can be much closer.
And one of the keys to this might be digital innovation, which is also a chapter on in the book.
Digital innovation, very much so, and because that is where the direction. I think Indonesia is perhaps more wired than India is. So to reach the young people here is much better to get into the digital age faster. And I think that is where, and I also see that as an area of cooperation, and the business cooperation between India and Indonesia. So not only the medium, but the message as well. Both are areas we can work on. And why, and to just take off from what Endy said, you know, India and Indonesia today are both democratic countries who are developing in pluralistic setups. This makes it so common. And what is more important is both of us are very young countries. Indonesia has more than 100 million plus young people, and India has about 700 million plus young people. So look at the common framework we are in. So no two democracies are alike, but all democracies are ultimately the same. So I think this is something that we need to build on, in which media is a very important role, and I think I fully agree with them. In our effort to look at each other directly, the media has to play a very important role, and digital media included. It is a situation today that in the India-Indonesia relationship went to a new height when India started looking east. But then Indonesia also looks east, so we both look the other way. So we need to look at each other too. So that is the challenge that we are trying to meet.
So a large part of this is people coming online for the first time, people getting smartphones, getting data reception.
Yes, people getting smartphones, hopefully smartphones made in India, and being brought here, which is essentially one of our important trade items from India. And I think that is the issue now, that how are we going to remain connected? And he has pointed out about the Mahabharata and other things. Everybody, anywhere I go in Indonesia, kuch hota, everybody knows. But kuch hota was 20 years ago, right? Now, something has to go after that. So how do we constantly reinvent? How do we remain engaged? And I think that is where media, people-to-people connection, tourism, culture, all play a very big role.
That begins to touch on investment, which is obviously a big part of the story globally right now. But we'll move into that later. First, though, I want to talk about India and Indonesia both had elections at the same time. Similar sort of leaders came to power with a sort of phenomenon around them, popular belief. What were your observations from that, Endy?
Well, there were comparisons made between Jokowi and Modi because they were elected around the same time, and they had similar characters. But I think now that they have been in power for more than 1 year, there comes the realization that many of the expectations that were placed on Jokowi, probably on Modi, were not met, maybe because the expectations were too high. But I think it still hasn't changed the fact that these are both democratically elected leaders. They're struggling. They're trying to lead. Two countries are very, very complex and huge and large. So you don't expect results overnight. But I think they are both good leaders, and I'm sure that they will give it a chance. They will deliver as much as they can, given the environment, political environment. Both are democracies, and democracies can be messy. But as long as they deliver, I think that will put faith in democracy and development at the same time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think he's right. I would just like to say the three things in common. One, I think the aspirational nature of the vote in both India and Indonesia, which led to the election of President Jokowi and Prime Minister Modi. I think this is very important. The huge aspirations of the middle classes and the youth are now governing how India and Indonesia will go forward. And that's what I said, democracy developing in a pluralistic format. The second one is the huge youth factor. I think the large number of voters in both countries do not have an experience of the anti-colonial struggle. So they are coming with a new set of thought which is coming in. And that is why youth is a very important area. And the third important factor is that in India, it takes almost 6 weeks to run the election, but 1 day to count it. In Indonesia, it takes 1 day to run the election and almost 6 weeks to count it. So there is some technical know-how of maybe electronic voting machines that could be brought in as one of the areas of how to pursue the democratic institution building in India and Indonesia.
Okay, and on that note, we'll go to break. Stay tuned on BeritaSatu.